right, so some of the coolest things that you get paid a lot of money for are these things called risk assessments. We just came off of one not too long ago where we were doing a risk assessment, basically a vulnerability assessment and a penetration test on a company to see what kind of vulnerabilities they had. Could we identify and act as a threat and tell them what potentially would be the impacts if people that weren't getting paid were to go through there and do some pretty nasty things on their network. So people in the business or companies will actually pay people like us to come in and do assessments for them. Essentially, it's kind of like an audit, where you come in and you're basically calling their baby ugly. You're trying to find a bunch of different things that are wrong with their system, and it's in the spirit of trying to help them rather than trying to just knock them down. So what we try to do is we come up with a likelihood. So if you come up with just a totally whack scenario, and based off of that scenario, you say, hey, your organization is totally vulnerable to alligators coming on and eating everybody up. Well, you know what? The probability of that happening is slim to none. But if you're coming in and doing a physical security assessment, and let's say you come up with the likelihood of somebody jumping your 4-foot fence is pretty high, then that's something that people should think about. Maybe they want to double the fence size and put a little bit of barbed wire on top of it. Try to keep the bad peoples out. So keep that in mind whenever you're going through and looking at these definitions here, because with the risk assessments, we get a likelihood of events happening, but then we come up with these things called a mitigation. So mitigation is, what are we going to put in place to try to reduce the risk? So think about this right here. If you're driving your car and you're going down the road, going to school on the way home, what mitigation controls are in place whenever we're on the road? Well, first thing and foremost that I think of are traffic lights, right? Stop signs, things that really we all know about that govern the flow of traffic. Well, the internet and specifically organizations do the same thing. We may end up putting speed limit signs or throttling bandwidth on networks. We could have blocking traffic, like a whitelist to allow or a blacklist to block. Well, if we go through and do these risk mitigation strategies, then what ends up coming up with everything that's left over after we've gone through and made sure that we've put things in place to try to reduce the risk, then whatever is left over is what we're accepting as our residual risk. So we've gone through, we've deployed a bunch of different types of controls, maybe a couple firewalls, maybe a couple new switches, maybe put an 8-foot fence like I was just saying up instead of a 4-foot fence. Well, after we've gone through and spend a bunch of money, whatever's left over is called our residual risk. And these are terms that you may end up seeing on the exam.